Alrighty, folks. This is going to be our first video that I'm going to post for our 107B class. And the very first thing that we need to cover is the definition of what a fraction is. Alright, so a fraction, we're familiar with a couple of terms. The numerator is the number up top, and then we've got our denominator in the bottom. So we'll be using those terms. And so I'm going to define a fraction in the arbitrary sense, in terms of sort of the unknowns A and B, A as our numerator, B is our denominator. And over here I've got the 1, 2, 3, because this is going to be a three-step process, okay? So when we're drawing fractions on a number line or explaining in words how we arrive at a certain fraction, we're going to always try to reference this three-step process, all right? And so the first step in the process is going to be to establish a whole, all right? And we don't mean a whole, H-O-L-E, we mean with a W, so like an entire object. So one whole item, one whole unit, something that we're going to be breaking up into smaller pieces to form fractions with. All right, so we always want to establish a whole. So one way we can do that is let's set up a number line. So let's say I want to do step 1 first. I'm just going to do something like this and go straight across like that. All right, and if you want to use a straight edge, if I'm writing this up on my homework and I don't have lined paper, maybe I'll use a straight edge to accomplish that. But here I just kind of went across, all right? And so we always want to indicate where 0 is. 0 is going to be important on our number line, kind of like the starting spot. So let me put maybe a 0 up top. I'm going to go ahead and call these things tick marks. Different folks might have different hash marks or whatever, but I tend to call them tick marks. And if I need to establish a whole, then let me put a 1 somewhere over here. So I could put another tick mark at the end, but let me put it just shy of there because we might expand beyond the number 1. But let me just put a good old whole number 1 right there. All right, so that's what I've done. I've established a whole. In other words, this length right here, that's one whole unit. Okay, if we don't have an actual unit, we might just say unit. This could be 1 foot, right, depending on how I'm zoomed in. Maybe it's 1 yard, maybe it's 1 meter, whatever. So we've got different units in there. Part 2 is going to be to break the whole up into B equal pieces. So break the whole or split the whole into B equal length segments or sections. All right. So B here doesn't refer to the length of the segments that we're going to make. It refers to the number of segments that we're going to make. So this is, let me do an example of the fraction, let's say 3/4. Because it's kind of hard to graph this thing in arbitrary. You got to remember ellipses, those dot, 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 to kind of indicate some sort of unknown distance in between. We want to avoid that for now. So what this means is my A right here is 3 and my B is 4, all right? And we haven't mentioned A yet in the definition of what a fraction is. So what this says is establish a whole. So I've got one whole right here, and then break the whole into, in this case, 4 equal segments. Okay, so equal length segments is going to be important. We want to strive for equal length segments so that the fractions that we end up shading on these number lines make sense visually. We don't want one large chunk and then a small one and then a sort of a medium length one. We want to do our best to create these to be equal lengths. So I'm going to go through it right now since we're introducing the definition. Afterwards, I'll show maybe a different approach to representing the same fraction so you can guarantee equal lengths. All right, so that can be helpful. Since I've got to get 4 equal lengths, I could just start trying to put my first mark here, maybe. So I'm going to want to put 3 marks in here, right, to separate this space into 4 equal length segments. I could start by estimating where my first one would be, then put my second one, then maybe put my third one. So let me try that. So maybe I think a quarter lives right around there, 1/4 or 1/4, and then my second mark, and then sort of my third mark. All right, and now, so if it looks the way it does on your screen as it does on mine, this isn't really a great splitting up of this whole, right? Because this segment looks a little too small, right? This segment looks a little too long, so that's not really ideal. So we want to try to do our best, and it's not really an art class, so it doesn't have to be 100% perfect, but we want to do the best that we can. So let me put up a 1 over here. And so if we've got an even number in our denominator, for me, it's sometimes nice to sort of split that in half. So let me try to visualize and split that into 2 equal segments. So at this point I put one little tick mark, which split my original whole into 2 equal segments. And now let me try to split each one of those in half again. All right, and there we go. And so at this point I've got little sort of smaller tick marks, smaller size here, a little bit taller there. That's okay. So if you look at like a tape measure or a ruler, then you've got that sort of pattern going on there. For the sake of the video, I'll try to make them a little bit longer so we can sort of visualize all of them. All right. And now, is this perfect? Am I going to break out a tape measure and make sure each of these segments are exactly equal length as one another? No, but I think I did a better job this time than I did the first time around. Okay, so we'll strive for perfection within limits. Okay, so we break the whole into B equal pieces. In this case, pieces, the 4 represents not the size of the pieces, but the amount of pieces, or the number of pieces that we've got right there. All right, and now the last part of our definition is we can discuss what A means individually, but the last part is that we're just going to introduce the fraction now, A over B. So let me sort of put that in quotes. A over B is the collection of A of these pieces. Alrighty. So again here, A now is the number of pieces that we're collecting. And so how are we going to show that we're collecting pieces on the number line? Typically what we'll do is just sort of shade the number line. All right, so let me grab a different color. You will want to invest in some different color, either pencils or crayons. Crayon, the tip gets a little thick, but pencils are fine. Something to, markers are good, something to indicate what's going on the number line, because as we get deeper in the semester, we're going to have sort of the balancing act of 2 or 3 different things going on within sort of the same set of number lines here. So I'll get a different color, and I just want to shade now, collect 1, 2, 3. So starting at the 0, let me just sort of shade it like this, 1, 2, and 3 of those segments. And now the fraction 3 over 4 is exactly what I've shaded. It's 3/4 or 3/4 of my whole. Alrighty. So not really too crazy. Nothing so deep going on there that it's baffling to the mind, but we just want to be clear. So yeah, so establish the whole. We will always want to cover that base. We will be breaking them into equal length segments, and then we've got to collect a certain amount, and there we go. So some of the things you'll have in the homework, some of them you'll have a number line and they say locate the 1, right? So sort of that's sort of like establishing a whole. Maybe there's some other numbers on the number line and you have to figure out where the 1 belongs. So you've got something like that. Let me show another way if you do sort of like a little bit more precision in your work. If I know right off the bat that I want to draw 3/4, then let me sort of combine steps 1 and 2 as I create my number line. In other words, what I'm going to do here is I'm still going to start with my setup, my 0, let's say, and just sort of a line moving off to the right. And when in doubt, make it a little extra long. And then if you don't use all of it, that's fine. So what I can do is I'm gonna sort of make my whole. I'm gonna establish my whole at the same time or simultaneously as I'm sort of forcing it to have 4 equal length segments. And what do I mean by that? Let me use some kind of fixed length object. So in a classroom or in these videos, I'll often use the eraser because that's pretty helpful. If you need small segments, I could use this end of it. But let me just sort of align the eraser with my 0 and put my mark like that. Okay, and so then I've got 1, now I've got 2 segments, and now I know that those are equal length because I'm basing them off the same object. And then I can go 3, and then I can go 4. And so now I was trying to create a whole with 4 equal segments. So I created the segments first, equal segments. I'll sort of move along 4 of them and put the 1 right there. And as soon as I put that 1, I'm sort of accomplishing now both steps at once. Is I've established my whole, and then now I can collect. I've got the 4 equal segments, and then I can collect however many I want. All right. So let's say I'm on this number line, and I want to collect 3/4 or 3/4 again. So I'll just shade 1, 2, 3 of them, and there we go. Okay. And at this point, you might be wondering, looking at these 2 number lines and saying, wait a minute, why is the blue line, if they're both 3/4, why is the blue line longer than the green line, right? And that's because each line features a different sized whole, right? So if you eat 3/4 of a blue pizza, a large pizza, right? And if I eat 3/4 of a smaller green sandwich, then we can't necessarily compare those two fractions because we have different wholes to begin with. All right. So with some of the homework questions, when you're trying to compare fractions, which one is larger than the other, what you're going to first want to do is establish one consistent whole that then you can create each fraction through our definition in relation to that same whole, and then we can compare those things. All right. So let me wrap up this video here, and then I'll follow up shortly with some others. All right.